Alrighty, we are at the end of the Godzilla Cross Kong-a-thon, and last night I watched the film Godzilla Cross Kong: The New Empire. Probably most of you have already seen it. In case you haven't, this will have a few spoilers towards the end, but I will give special shoutouts for those before I do them. This is largely going to be spoiler free, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to my world. Won't you come on in?
So a bit of a setup for the film's plot. The New Empire starts off a few years later after the events of Godzilla vs. Kong, and everyone wants a piece of the juicy Hollow Earth pie. Governments want to get in there to do evil government shit that they like to do. Big corporations probably want to start making fast food franchises there and thrill rides and shit, but Monarch has the Hollow Earth on lock. They're the only ones with the technology and all of the built-up knowledge about how to study the flora and fauna of the Hollow Earth in a safe way, at least for now. Meanwhile, everyone's been keeping Kong and Goji away from each other as far as humanly possible. Godzilla's been taking care of threats on the surface, which is good because Kong is down in the Hollow Earth, fighting and eating weird hyena monsters and feeling incredibly lonely and isolated.
No one knows what it's like to feel these fears.
Meanwhile, Rebecca Hall's Monarch scientist character, I honestly always forget her name, is struggling to have Gia, the last surviving tribe member from Skull Island, insert her into high school and get her to like high school, which is, don't do that. Don't fucking put that shit on her. It's super uncool. And while that's happening, the plot kicks off with these weird signals that are emanating from deep within the Hollow Earth, like even deeper than normal, like Hollow Earth 2, even more hollow, I guess. Anyway, Gia picks up on those bad vibes, and that's enough for Rebecca Hall to then enlist Matthew from Downton Abbey and Paperboy from Atlanta, returning from G vs. K, to investigate the brouhaha down in the Hollow Earth. At the same time, Godzilla knows something's up too, so he then starts just pigging out on tons of radiation all across the world and to get prepped for the big throwdown that's inevitably gonna happen. While Kong discovers he's not as lonely as he thought, just mostly. What then transpires is a crazy 100-mile-a-minute slobber knocker that never drags and is always concerned with entertaining you. That's the basic story setup, and thankfully it's streamlined and very simple to follow, and it's not as clunky as the first act was in the last Monsterverse film. So I don't want to go through the plot beyond that, but now's as good a time as any to tell you what I really liked and what I thought worked in this movie, because thankfully it's a list that's a good deal longer than what didn't. First off, the human characters are only here to serve the monsters and the plot revolving around the monsters. Basically all of them are going, "Don't worry Kong, your Godzilla is all that Kongs." Now this was already quite pared back in the last movie, and here they just took a knife and cut off the fat of this already very lean steak. Gia is the only one that kind of has her own storyline going on, and I think that's for the best because no one else is as interesting, and she really reminds me of any of those island-dwelling characters that appeared in a bunch of the Godzilla movies throughout the Showa era. They just get wrapped up in some of the main characters' plot, and they're just kind of there, but in terms of the human characters, Gia is kind of the focus, and yeah, that was a smart move. And that's kind of funny, because that's usually a trope reserved for Godzilla characters, secondary characters, and Gia is supposed to be the Kong adjacent one. So to summarize, I never felt bored by the cast. They all did their jobs as they're supposed to. And nobody really overstayed their welcome. And it also doesn't hurt that Dan Stevens looks like Dan Stevens. Moving on, I felt the monster on monster action was really inventive this time around. We got Kong laying down traps, Scar King uses his crazy spine bone whip. There's a really amazing fight scene that uses Hollow Earth's gravity to its advantage. And finally, there's a couple of crazy over-the-top team-up moves that you might have seen in the trailers before. Now, Godzilla definitely plays second fiddle to Kong here. I think he has less overall screen time in this than he did in the last movie, but I do think that when Godzilla did do stuff, it was way more memorable. There's a few kills he gets that I'll remember forever. Whereas I just remember him breaking a few things in Godzilla vs. Kong, and then they have their fight. So I think they use Godzilla's screen time here pretty effectively. Now, there's this one move that happens during Godzilla and Kong's brief fight that they have mano a mano in this movie that is as over the top as anything seen in any of these films. In the last 70 years, it's something special, and I was shouting at the screen. If you know, you know. Also, there's way more Titans in this than you might expect. A lot of them have been not in the marketing at all. And I don't mean the main players, the heroes and villains. I mean ones that support them. There's 3 or 4 that I don't think have ever been shown any footage quite yet. And I really appreciated that because I did think that was lacking in the last movie, Godzilla vs. Kong, because it was just the 2. Here, there's 3 big ones that get fight scenes, so I really appreciated that. So next up, Suko, this little guy. I actually wound up liking him quite a bit. And I mention this because, and I'm just assuming here, when he first showed up in the very first trailer for the new Empire, I bet a percentage of you either did a little audible groan or bombastic side eye because you're okay, what's going on here? Because let's be real, a lot of kaiju cinema kind of doesn't handle this type of character well. Whenever there's a new Manila or Minya or Godzuki or Son of Kong, whatever, it's a pretty low batting average that they make these characters not super annoying or kind of pointless. The trailer, though, showed pretty much out of context, style scenes for him. You just see a little bit, and in the finished film, he's quite different and much more nuanced than you'd think. And honestly, does some pretty important shit here and there, so good on you, Suko. I wouldn't mind seeing more of this guy in the future if more films are to come, although if I'm going to be honest, I'm not looking forward to... It's not going to be fun to watch his angsty teen phase. That's not going to be fun at all. I mean, mine wasn't. In terms of production, I think everything was on point. The cinematography, the CGI, the sets, everything was more colorful and lively than Godzilla vs. Kong, and that was already a pretty flashy film. Here, though, they just kind of lean into the more Technicolor, Hollow Earth sort of visuals they have going on, and there's a lot of really impressive effects like Godzilla's radiation, his breath, freezing water, and lots of green goop. That's the new stand-in for blood, and it appears quite a bit, actually. Aside from 1 or 2 shots, there's this one shot of Godzilla where I was that looks a little dodgy. I overall thought everything looked pretty superb. This is impressive in another way, though, because after some quick research, it seems Godzilla Cross Kong: The New Empire is actually a good chunk cheaper to make than Godzilla vs. Kong was. It's 135 million against the upper ceiling of 200 for the last film. So I'm glad they kept it cheaper because that just leaves the door open for more possible sequels. And after this, I could go for a few more, yeah. Finally, I think I'm going to wrap up on the positives about the overall vibe that the new Empire is going for, which is purposefully very, very different than -1 or Shin or even the earlier MonsterVerse movies. There's so much here that just evokes late 60s, early 70s Showa era vibes, impossible technology that can't exist. Ancient civilizations that live under the earth, crazy tag team bouts between multiple heroes and villains, cute sidekick characters, gravity-defying ships that also shouldn't work, and then trippy, weird, colorful visuals. The new Empire is very much a mishmash of all those things from the Showa era, but it also does enough to kind of make it its own thing as well. Now, I will agree this is a very sudden pivot from the deadly serious vibes of like Godzilla 2014 and even King of the Monsters, but you know, if you really like those, especially 2014, you might not like what this is going for. But for me, long term, I think this is probably the right path to go down. It just keeps things interesting, and personally, I'm totally fine with both methods to monster movie making. There's the more haunting, somber, and mysterious tales, or there's the more crazy, wild sci-fi brawl fest that just want you to have a good, silly time. I think both styles can coexist with each other, and regardless of your preference, all it really means is more kaiju cinema for all of us, and that's never a bad thing. Okay, speaking of not so great things, let's talk about the not so great things. I think my main issue with the new Empire is kind of its villains, in that we really didn't get enough of them. As I said before, the Scar King, the new ape on the block, has a lot of tricks up his sleeve or fur, and he's animated really well and has a lot of charisma, but like, you just don't get enough of him. He's supposed to be this big, huge threat, and he kind of really isn't. We get told through exposition how evil and cruel he is, but we don't really see it. There's like one quick scene where he deals with a problem very quickly, and it just kind of moves on. I would have really liked to have seen more scenes where you see him being that cruel and that evil, and the film kind of lacks that, and you really need to get him over as like this unstoppable threat that Godzilla and Kong can't really handle by themselves. If you start building him up earlier in the movie, he comes like 60% into it or something, and then peppered that in with more scenes, you know, showing a bit of him here in the shadows there, doing something, you know, stuff like that. I think it could have really gone a long way to getting him over, and he's just kind of shy of that. Related to this is spoilers coming up. Okay. If you've been keeping your ear low to the ground on this movie, you'll know that there's another kaiju villain named Shimo. Now, I've been aware of Shimo for quite a few months because of toys, of course. Those fucking toys always leak everything. So I was actually pretty hyped going into this to see Shimo, like, oh, they're really positioning this monster as like another big new threat, and Shimo kind of fell a little flat for me. Like, if you're gonna stuff two brand new villains in there, you kind of need to make room for them both. And Shimo gets even less than Scar King does. Now, its design is very cool. I like it a lot, but I mean, it's being controlled by this weird crystal thing that the Scar King has, so he basically uses Shimo like an attack dog, and that's kind of a weird dynamic, because it means that Shimo strictly isn't a villain, and aside from doing like freezing breath attacks, doesn't do much aside from that. So I'd rather they had just built up Scar King as the ultimate evil, instead not cut the tension and the villain threat between the two, because neither get enough as it is. It'd be one thing if like you just see Shimo very quickly, but the movie then tries to build Shimo up, and it's too late for that. You barely built Scar King up. You can't, it's too late now. Like, Kong and Godzilla are already OP as shit in this. Godzilla has the evolved form, Kong has like the metal monarch boxing glove, and then you add a magical MacGuffin into the mix, like the little crystal, and it kind of deflates the tension a little bit. Like, just as a comparison, Ghidorah was built up really well in King of the Monsters. Like, he was the ultimate big bad, and they did a great job with him, and less so with Scar King and Shimo. Also, another spoiler warning. Mothra is in this. Yeah, kind of sudden. I didn't know about this until like a day or two before the movie premiered. But yeah, apparently there was a whole other monster protector spirit thing that was helping out a little bit in the background, and that was an all original design. And apparently test audience are like, what the fuck is this? This is weird. I'm not a fan of this. So they, like a couple of months ago, a year ago maybe, they decided, all right, let's scrap that. Let's just replace that CGI with Mothra and just call it a day, I guess. And while I think that's probably the right choice to put in Mothra, because you can't have another third new giant kaiju that's never been referenced before and have time for that. So if you just say, oh, it's Mothra, she's the protector of blah, 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 that does solve the problem. But it does, the Mothra section does feel a little tacked on, I think. And I think the movie might have actually been a smidge better if you just cut that little bit of a storyline out. That was like an extra, 5 minutes where you could have used it to big up the villains a little bit more. But I mean, I still like Mothra. She's still gorgeous, still a queen. Finally, in terms of negatives, I think the ending, no spoilers, but I think the ending was a bit deflating. There's just no meat to it. We don't see what the human characters go on to do. Again, not really a spoiler. It's like the final battle happens, it concludes, our victors do a pose, credits roll. I mean, I don't need like 2 to 3 Marvel mid-credit scenes and some shit, but I need something more than nothing. Just a hint of where we could possibly be going in the future. I would appreciate that because it left me wanting more. You gotta give me more than 0. So yeah, I think, if I was to say what you can do to like sort of make this movie better overall, you give it maybe 10, 15 more minutes, just for the villains, and then you could have had a pretty near perfect bit of popcorn escapism entertainment. But as it is, the finished product, I still think it's a very streamlined, breezy, fun monster mash that really appeals to the kid in all of us. But it still remains a little bit uneven, so that's why I'm gonna give it 4 Godzilla pajama skelemats out of 5. And if you're looking for like a message or a deep emotional connection with the characters, you're not getting that in Godzilla Cross Kong: The New Empire. But then again, I don't know why you'd be searching or expecting that in a movie called Godzilla Cross Kong: New World Order, The New Empire. Like, is -1 or Shin a better piece of cinema? Yes. Is it fair to compare what those were doing with this? No, not really, because sometimes you don't want to put on Gojira 1954. Sometimes you just want to put on Godzilla versus Megalon, like Jet Jaguar in the next one. In the next film, Legendary, do it, you cowards. Hashtag Jaguar for Monsterverse. Alright, so that about wraps it up for my review. Do let me know what you thought of it or the movie in the comments below. I really hope you enjoyed the Godzilla Cross Kong-a-thong. Said thong again. I should just call it, if I do this in the future for another movie, I should just cut to the chase and call it the Kong-a-thong again. Once -1 is released on video and streaming or whatever, I'm going to do a full review of that, I think, because I really wanted to talk more in depth about that, but I only saw it the one time and I needed to see it a few more times. Whereas this, you're not going to get lost in the plot and the nuances so much, so look for that in the future, and I will see you next time.